I gave them 23 years. 23 years of my life, of late nights and emergency calls at 2 in the morning, of canceled vacations and missed birthdays, of being the person they called when everything was on fire and nobody else knew what to do. I built their infrastructure from the ground up. I trained most of the people in that department. I carried them through 3 major migrations, countless security incidents, and at least a dozen situations that would have bankrupted the company if I hadn't been there to fix them. And they replaced me with a 20-year-old kid who had a 6-month bootcamp certificate and the last name of the guy who owned the building. My name is David. I'm 47 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was the lead systems engineer at Meridian Financial Technologies, a mid-sized fintech company that handled payment processing and compliance systems for about 2,000 corporate clients. When I started there in the early 2000s, we had maybe 30 employees and ran everything out of a single server closet. By the time I left, we were processing over 40 million transactions a month across multiple data centers with redundant cloud infrastructure. I built that. Not alone, but I was there for every major decision, every architecture choice, every crisis that taught us what not to do next time. I knew that system the way you know your own house in the dark. Every dependency, every quirk, every buried configuration that some contractor set up in 2011 and never documented. The CEO back then was a guy named Richard Castellano. He was technical enough to understand what I did, even if he couldn't do it himself. We had mutual respect. When Richard retired and sold his majority stake to an investment group led by Marcus Hartwell, things started to change, but slowly. Marcus was old money, family wealth, the kind of guy who owned a dozen businesses and treated them like fantasy football teams. For the first 2 years under Marcus, not much changed day to day. I reported to our CTO, Angela, who was brilliant and respected the hell out of the engineering team. We got new budget approvals, hired a few more people, started a major cloud migration that I architected. Everything was moving forward. Then Marcus's nephew graduated college. His name was Trevor Hartwell. 20 years old, fresh out of a state school with a generic business degree, and apparently some kind of IT bootcamp certificate he finished online over the summer. I didn't know he existed until Angela called me into her office one Monday morning and told me we were going to have a new technical infrastructure analyst starting that week. The way she said it with that specific tone, I knew something was wrong. "He's Marcus's nephew," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "He's interested in learning the business from the technical side. Marcus wants him integrated into your team." I nodded slowly. I had worked in corporate environments long enough to know what this meant. Babysitting duty. Some executive's kid needed a job that sounded impressive, and we were going to pretend he contributed while he collected a paycheck and eventually moved on to something else. "Sure," I said. "I can assign him some projects. Documentation cleanup, maybe audit some of our backup procedures." "Marcus wants him involved in strategic decisions," Angela interrupted. "He wants Trevor in the architecture meetings, the planning sessions, everything high level." That should have been my first warning. Not that I would be mentoring someone, but that someone with no experience was being pushed into decision-making spaces before he had earned the credibility to be there. Trevor started that Thursday. I was in the data center coordinating a hardware refresh when I got the message that he was upstairs waiting to meet me. I wrapped up what I was doing, washed the dust off my hands, and headed up to the main office. He was standing in the break room with Marcus, both of them laughing about something, 2 cups of expensive coffee from the place across the street sitting on the counter. Trevor was tall, good-looking in that effortless way some people are, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. He had the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no about anything that mattered. Marcus saw me and waved me over, all smiles. "David, perfect. I want you to meet my nephew, Trevor." "Trevor, this is David Chen, our lead systems engineer. He's been here since the Stone Age, knows everything about how this place runs." The Stone Age, like I was some relic, I shook Trevor's hand. His grip was firm, probably something someone taught him in a seminar about making good impressions. "Good to meet you," I said. "Angela mentioned you'd be joining the infrastructure team." "Yeah, man, super excited," Trevor said, flashing a white smile. I've been really getting into cloud architecture, systems optimization, all that next generation stuff. I think there's a lot of potential to modernize what you guys have built here. What we had built, he had been in the building for 30 minutes. Well, we're in the middle of a pretty significant cloud migration right now, I said carefully. It's a multi-year project, lot of complexity. Happy to bring you up to speed on where we are. Oh, I've done a ton of cloud work, Trevor said casually. Oz, Azure, all the major platforms. Got my certifications last summer. I'm actually really interested in replatforming some of the legacy systems, maybe introducing some modern DevOps processes. He had certifications from last summer. I had been running production infrastructure since before he was born. Marcus clapped his nephew on the shoulder, beaming with pride. Trevor's got a great mind for this stuff. Fresh perspective, new ideas. I think he's going to help us move faster, shake things up a little. There it was. Shake things up, the most dangerous phrase in corporate technology. It meant someone who didn't understand why things were the way they were was about to start breaking them to prove they were smart. I spent the rest of that day showing Trevor around, introducing him to the team, giving him the standard onboarding overview. He nodded along, asked a few surface-level questions, and spent a lot of time talking about things he had learned in his bootcamp. Kubernetes this, microservices that, all the buzzwords you see in LinkedIn thought leader posts. My team was polite but wary. Jenny, one of our senior DevOps engineers, pulled me aside after Trevor left for the day. Please tell me he's not making any actual decisions, she said quietly. He's here to learn, I said, not believing it myself. Over the next few weeks, Trevor shadowed me in meetings, sat in on architecture reviews, and attended our weekly operation sync-ups. At first, he mostly listened, but gradually he started offering opinions. They were always confident, always delivered like insights, and almost always revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what we actually did. In one meeting, he suggested we could save money by shutting down our redundant failover databases because cloud providers have built-in redundancy. He didn't understand that our clients had contractual SLAs that required specific failover capabilities that we controlled, not the provider. In another, he proposed we eliminate our entire staging environment and just test in production because that's what modern agile teams do. I had to explain, very carefully, that in a financial compliance environment, deploying untested code to production could result in regulatory fines that would dwarf any savings. Every time I corrected him or explained why something wouldn't work, I saw a flash of irritation cross his face. He didn't like being told he was wrong, especially not in front of other people. And he especially didn't like being told he was wrong by someone he was already starting to see as outdated. After about a month, the dynamic started to shift. Marcus began sitting in on some of our bigger meetings, and whenever Trevor would suggest something, Marcus would light up and tell us to explore that or put together a proposal. It didn't matter that the idea was half-baked or actively dangerous. It mattered that it came from Trevor. Then came the day that changed everything. We were 8 months into our cloud migration, moving our core transaction processing systems from our legacy data center to a hybrid cloud architecture. It was delicate work. We were talking about systems that handled millions of dollars in payment processing every hour, with strict compliance requirements and zero tolerance for data loss. I had architected a phased approach. Move non-critical systems first, validate everything, build confidence, then gradually migrate the core platforms with extensive testing and rollback plans at every stage. We were on phase 3 of 7, and everything was going smoothly. Trevor had been increasingly vocal about the migration being too slow and over-engineered. In his mind, we should just move everything at once, get it over with, stop being so cautious. He had started saying this in meetings, and worse, Marcus had started agreeing with him. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Angela called me into her office. Her expression told me this wasn't going to be good. "David, I need to talk to you about your role," she said, and my stomach dropped. "Marcus has been really impressed with Trevor's strategic thinking," she continued, clearly uncomfortable. "He thinks Trevor brings a modern perspective that could help us accelerate some of our initiatives." I said nothing. I knew where this was going. He wants to promote Trevor to senior infrastructure architect and have him take over leadership of the cloud migration project. The room felt very cold. "Angela, he's been here 2 months. He doesn't understand our systems. He doesn't understand our compliance requirements. He doesn't. I know, she said quietly. I pushed back. I explained all of that, but Marcus is the owner and he's made his decision. So what happens to me? I asked, my voice flat. You'll report to Trevor, provide technical support, help him get up to speed, ensure continuity. Report to Trevor. After 23 years, I was being demoted to report to a kid who thought AWS certifications made him qualified to run a production financial platform. This is a mistake, I said. A serious mistake. Our migration plan exists for a reason. If Trevor changes approach without understanding the dependencies, then you'll be there to guide him, Angela said, but she didn't believe it either. I'm sorry, David, I really am. I walked out of that office in a daze. 23 years. I had given them 23 years, and this was what it meant. Nothing. The moment someone with the right last name showed up, decades of expertise became an inconvenience. The announcement went out the next day. Trevor was thrilled, already talking about his vision for the infrastructure team. My team was horrified. Jenny actually came to my office and asked if I was going to quit. I don't know yet, I told her honestly. That weekend, I sat in my home office and really thought about it. I could quit. I could probably get another job, maybe even a better one. But there was something else gnawing at me, something darker. I kept thinking about all the times I had saved that company, all the nights I had spent fixing problems that would have destroyed them, all the times they had called me, panicked, desperate, and I had dropped everything to make it right. And now they thought I was replaceable. They thought this kid could do what I did. Maybe they needed to learn exactly what it was I had been doing all these years. I made a decision that weekend. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. I was going to do exactly what they asked me to do. I was going to report to Trevor, provide him with technical support, and follow his leadership. Exactly his leadership. Precisely his decisions, with meticulous documentation of every single choice. Monday morning, I came in with a new approach. When Trevor proposed something, I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining why it wouldn't work. I just asked clarifying questions and documented his answers. Trevor, just to confirm, you want to accelerate the migration timeline and move all core systems in a single deployment window next month. Yeah, exactly. We've been dragging this out too long. One big push, get it done, move forward. Got it. And you're aware that means we'll be moving the payment processing engine, the compliance reporting system, and the customer data platform all at once, outside of our usual change windows. David, I need you to stop being so risk-averse. This is how modern companies operate. Fast iteration, bold moves. Understood. I'll update the project plan to reflect your timeline. I sent a detailed email summarizing the conversation, CC'd Angela, and filed it in a folder I had created called Migration Decisions, Trevor Hartwell. I started keeping meticulous records of everything. Every meeting, every decision, every time I raised a concern and was overruled. My team noticed the change. Jenny pulled me aside again. David, what are you doing? You know this is going to fail. I'm doing exactly what I've been asked to do, I said calmly. I'm supporting Trevor's leadership. But document everything, I told her quietly. Every concern you raise, every objection, every warning. Send it in writing and keep copies. She understood. Word spread quietly through the team. We all started keeping records. Trevor, meanwhile, was in his element. He loved being in charge, loved making bold pronouncements in meetings, loved the way Marcus would nod approvingly whenever he talked about disrupting our legacy approach or moving at startup speed. He put together a new migration plan. Instead of our careful phased approach, he wanted to do what he called a big bang transition. Move everything in one weekend, cut over all at once, prove it could be done fast. I read his plan carefully. It was a disaster. He had missed critical dependencies, overlooked integration points, ignored the rollback procedures that had taken me months to develop. There were at least a dozen points where the whole thing could catastrophically fail. I documented every single issue I found and sent him a detailed email with my concerns. 17 pages, single-spaced, every risk clearly explained with specific technical details. He responded in 2 sentences. Thanks for the feedback. I think you're overestimating the complexity. We'll be fine. I forwarded his response to my personal email and added it to my folder. The new migration date was set for the last weekend in September. Trevor scheduled it proudly, sent out a company-wide announcement about how we were accelerating our digital transformation. Marcus replied, all with congratulations. 6 weeks before the migration, I did something I had never done in 23 years. I submitted a vacation request for that exact weekend. I was going to visit my sister upstate, I said. It had been planned for months. Trevor approved it without even asking. He probably thought I was being petty, trying to avoid being part of his success. He didn't realize what it meant that the person who built the systems wouldn't be there when he tried to move them. As the date approached, Trevor got more and more confident. He held daily stand-ups where he talked about the migration like it was already a done deal. He brought in consultants from a firm that specialized in rapid cloud transformation, kids in their 20s who talked fast and showed slick PowerPoint presentations. My team grew increasingly nervous. Our senior database administrator, Paul, who had been with the company almost as long as I had, came to me 3 weeks out. David, the data migration scripts he's planning to use don't account for the referential integrity constraints in the compliance database. If he runs those, we're going to lose transactional consistency. Did you tell Trevor? Yes, he said the consultants assured him their scripts handle all standard database relationships. But our compliance database isn't standard. We have custom constraint logic because of the regulatory requirements. I know, I explained that. He told me I was being resistant to change. Document it, I said. Email him exactly what will happen if those scripts run against that database. Be specific. Keep a copy. Paul sent the email. Trevor responded that they had tested extensively in dev, and it would be fine. The dev database had about 10,000 records. Production had about 40 million, with complex relationships built up over 15 years. 2 weeks before the migration, our network engineer, Sarah, raised concerns about the bandwidth calculations. Trevor's plan assumed we could transfer about 8 terabytes of data over our internet connection to the cloud in a 4-hour window. Sarah did the math and showed that our actual bandwidth, accounting for overhead and encryption, would take at least 16 hours. She sent Trevor the calculations. He told her the cloud provider had optimized transfer protocols that would speed it up. He didn't understand that physics doesn't care about optimized protocols. 1 week out, our security lead Mike noticed that Trevor's plan didn't include any of the compliance validation steps required by our financial industry certifications. We had specific procedures we had to follow, actual regulatory requirements, or we would lose our authorization to process payments. Mike sent a detailed compliance risk assessment. Trevor responded that they would handle compliance after the migration was stable. Every concern, every warning, every technical objection was documented, sent to Trevor in writing, and filed away. He overruled all of them. He was completely confident, and Marcus was completely supportive. The Thursday before the migration weekend, there was a big all-hands meeting. Marcus got up and talked about how this migration represented the company's bold new direction, how Trevor's leadership was exactly the kind of innovative thinking they needed. Trevor presented his plan to the whole company, talking about minimal downtime, seamless transition, how everyone should expect maybe an hour or 2 of reduced functionality Saturday night, and then everything would be better, faster, more modern. I sat in the back and said nothing. I had a folder on my laptop with about 300 pages of documentation. Every risk I had identified, every concern the team had raised, every warning that had been dismissed. That Friday, I packed my bag and drove upstate to my sister's place. I turned on my Outage office message. I silenced my work phone, and I waited. The migration was scheduled to start Saturday at 6 p.m. Trevor had a whole team there, the consultants, a few members of my infrastructure team who he had pressured into working the weekend. Paul told me later that Trevor gave a pep talk before they started, talking about making history. They began the cutover at 6:15 p.m. By 7:30 p.m., the first cracks appeared. The data transfer that was supposed to take 4 hours was showing completion estimates of 18 to 20 hours. They were barely 10% done, and the maintenance window Trevor had announced was supposed to end at midnight. By 8:00 p.m., customers started reporting transaction failures. The systems weren't fully cut over yet, but Trevor had disabled some of the legacy systems prematurely to force the transition. Payments were failing. Money was going missing in transit between systems. By 9:00 p.m., the database migration scripts hit the compliance database and, exactly as Paul had warned, broke the referential integrity constraints. 40 million records of transaction history suddenly had orphaned references and broken relationships. The compliance reporting system couldn't generate reports anymore. Every query was throwing errors. By 10:00 p.m., 3 of our largest clients were on the phone with our emergency support line, threatening legal action. Millions of dollars in transactions were stuck in limbo. Our support team had no answers because the people who understood the systems, my team, had been overruled so many times they stopped offering solutions. By 11:00 p.m., Trevor was panicking. He called Angela, she called Marcus. Marcus called an emergency executive session, and someone suggested they call me. My phone started ringing at 11:47 p.m. I was sitting on my sister's porch, drinking a beer, watching the stars. I looked at the caller ID, Marcus Hartwell. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. Then Angela called, voicemail. Then Trevor called. I almost answered that one just to hear the panic in his voice, but I didn't. Voicemail. The calls kept coming. 6, 7, 8 times. Texts started flooding in. David, emergency situation, need you now. David, please call back ASAP, critical outage. David, whatever you want, name your price. We need you here now. I finished my beer. I went inside and went to bed. I slept beautifully. Sunday morning, I woke up to 43 missed calls and 26 text messages. I made coffee, had breakfast with my sister, and finally, around 10 a.m., I opened my laptop and checked my personal email. Paul had sent me updates through the night. The migration had collapsed completely. By 2 a.m., they had tried to roll back, but Trevor hadn't properly documented the rollback procedures, and the consultants didn't understand the dependencies. The rollback failed. They were stuck in a state where neither the old system nor the new system was fully functional. Transaction processing was dead in the water. Compliance reporting was corrupted. Customer data was scattered across 3 different databases in inconsistent states. Our company had been effectively offline for 16 hours. We were losing approximately $200,000 per hour in processing fees alone, not counting the liability for the failed transactions or the regulatory fines we were going to face. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang again. Angela. This time I answered. David. Her voice was ragged. She had clearly been up all night. We need you. Now, please. I'm on vacation, Angela. Approved time off. David, the company is in crisis. Everything is down. We need someone who understands these systems. You have Trevor. He's the senior infrastructure architect. This was his migration plan. There was a long silence. David, please. Whatever problems there are, we can discuss them later. Right now, I have the CEO, the board, and 3 law firms asking me how we're going to fix this. I need you. I'll think about it, I said. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my Sunday. I'll be back in the office Monday morning, regular time. Monday, David, we can't wait until. I hung up. I spent the rest of Sunday hiking with my sister. It was a beautiful day. Clear skies, cool breeze, the leaves just starting to turn. My phone never stopped buzzing, but I didn't look at it. Monday morning, I drove back to the city. I stopped for coffee. I took my time. I arrived at the office at 9:15 a.m., my usual time. The place was in chaos. There were people I had never seen before in the office, crisis management consultants, probably, or lawyers. The customer support area sounded like a war zone, phones ringing constantly. I walked calmly to my office. Angela was waiting for me, along with Marcus and 2 people in suits I didn't recognize. David, thank God, Angela started. I held up my hand. Before we talk about anything, I need to clarify my role here. As of our last conversation, I report to Trevor Hartwell, Senior Infrastructure Architect. Where is Trevor? I should be getting my instructions from him. Marcus's face went red. Trevor has been relieved of his duties, effective immediately. We need you to take over the recovery effort. I see, I said calmly. I set down my bag and opened my laptop. I'll need a few things before I can assess the situation. First, I need my access restored to full administrative privileges. I noticed my permissions were reduced when Trevor took over the project. Second, I need written authorization to make whatever changes I deem necessary without approval from anyone. Third, I need a detailed timeline of every action taken since Saturday at 6 p.m. One of the suits stepped forward. Mr. Chen, I'm Robert Landry. I represent the company's legal team. We're prepared to meet your requirements. We need an estimate of how long it will take you to restore functionality. I looked at him evenly. I need to assess the damage first. Based on what I'm hearing, we're looking at a catastrophic failure across multiple systems. Give me 2 hours to evaluate, then I'll give you a timeline. 2 hours? Marcus exploded. We've been down for almost 40 hours, we're hemorrhaging money, we have clients threatening to sue, we need this fixed now. I turned to look at him directly. Mr. Hartwell, with respect, you have a very talented senior infrastructure architect who promised you he could handle this migration. Where is he? Why isn't he fixing this? The room went very quiet. Because you wanted fast over careful, I continued, my voice still calm. You wanted bold over competent. You wanted someone who told you what you wanted to hear instead of someone who told you the truth. And now you want me to fix the consequences of that choice. So I'll ask again, do I have full authority to do whatever is necessary, or would you like to keep second-guessing the person who actually built these systems? Marcus looked like he wanted to explode, but one of the lawyers put a hand on his arm and whispered something. You have full authority, Marcus said tightly. Fix this. I spent the next 2 hours doing a complete damage assessment. It was worse than I had imagined, and I had imagined pretty bad. The database corruption alone was going to take days to untangle. The failed rollback had created inconsistencies that would require manual reconciliation. Some transaction data was simply gone, lost in the ether between systems, but I had something Trevor didn't have. I had complete documentation of how everything was supposed to work. I had the original architecture plans, the dependency maps, the rollback procedures I had written before Trevor threw them out. I called Paul, Sarah, Mike, and Jenny into a conference room. Here's where we are, I said, pulling up the disaster map on the screen. We have about 72 hours before the regulatory agencies start asking questions we can't answer. We need to rebuild the core transaction system from the last clean backup, reconstruct the database relationships, and manually reconcile about 16 hours of failed transactions. That's not possible in 72 hours, Paul said quietly. It is if we do it right and we don't sleep much. I looked at each of them. I know you all tried to warn them. I know you documented everything. None of this is your fault. But right now, we're the only people who can save this company, and unfortunately, that means saving the people who put us in this position. Jenny spoke up. What about Trevor? Trevor is gone. Marcus fired him yesterday. And what about after this? Sarah asked. After we save them again, what's to stop them from doing the same thing next time? I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder I had been building for months. This is every warning we gave, every concern we raised, every technical objection that was overruled. 314 pages of documentation showing exactly who knew what and when. After we fix this, we're going to have a very different conversation about how decisions get made around here. We worked for 3 days straight. I had a cot brought into my office. We ordered food delivered, survived on coffee and spite, and slowly, painfully, rebuilt what Trevor had broken. 70 hours after I walked back into that office, we brought the core transaction system back online. 74 hours in, we had restored enough of the compliance database to generate the regulatory reports we needed. By the end of the week, we were processing transactions again, though we were still manually reconciling data for weeks afterward. The final damage assessment came out to $4.2 million in direct losses, failed transactions, penalty fees, emergency contractor costs, and regulatory fines. That didn't count the 3 major clients we lost or the reputational damage that would take years to repair. 2 weeks after the crisis, I got called into a meeting with Marcus, Angela, and the board of directors. I brought my folder. Marcus looked like he had aged 10 years. David, on behalf of the company and the board, I want to apologize. You tried to warn us and we didn't listen. Your expertise and your team's expertise saved this company from complete failure. I nodded but said nothing. We'd like to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer, reporting directly to the board. full executive compensation package, equity stake, complete authority over all technical decisions. I let the offer sit there for a moment. I appreciate that, I said finally, but I need to understand something first. What exactly changed? 2 months ago, you were convinced that Trevor's 6-month bootcamp certificate made him more qualified than my 23 years of experience. You were ready to bet the entire company on that belief. What's different now, other than the fact that you lost the bet? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. We made a mistake, a serious mistake. We let personal relationships cloud our judgment. You let nepotism override competence, I corrected. You valued loyalty to family over loyalty to the people who actually built this company. And when those of us who knew better tried to warn you, you treated us like we were being difficult instead of listening to what we were telling you. I opened my folder and slid a copy across the table. This is documentation of every concern my team and I raised about Trevor's migration plan. Every technical risk we identified, every warning we gave, every single time we told you this would fail. All of it was dismissed. Some of it was called resistance to change. Trevor told our database administrator he was being negative when he explained exactly the problem that ended up corrupting 40 million records. The board members were reading through the documents, their expressions growing darker. Here's my counteroffer, I said. I'll take the CTO position under the following conditions. 1. All technical decisions require sign-off from qualified technical staff, not business executives with family connections. 2. We implement a formal technical review process that can override business pressure when safety and stability are at risk. 3. I want it in writing that no family member of any executive or board member can be hired into a technical role without going through the same interview and evaluation process as any other candidate. And 4. I want a formal apology sent to every member of my infrastructure team acknowledging that their expertise was disregarded and that the company failed them. I closed the folder. If you can't agree to those terms, then thank you for the offer, but I'll be accepting a position I was offered last week by one of the clients you lost. They've asked me to build their infrastructure team, and they're willing to let me bring my people with me. It wasn't a bluff. Casseller Financial, one of our former clients, had reached out 3 days into the crisis recovery. They had watched how we handled the disaster and decided they wanted the people who actually knew what they were doing. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Marcus nodded slowly. We agree to your terms, all of them. I want it in writing, reviewed by my attorney, before I give you my answer. 2 days later, I had a contract that gave me more authority and protection than any CTO in the company's history. I signed it. So did 6 members of my infrastructure team who got significant raises and new titles. Trevor, I learned, had been quietly paid out and sent to work at one of Marcus's other companies, something in real estate where he couldn't break anything too important. Marcus never spoke to me about his nephew again. I've been CTO for 4 months now. We finished the cloud migration last week, using the original phased plan I had designed. It came in under budget, with 0 downtime, and every system is running better than before. Last week, I got an email from Trevor. He wanted to reconnect and asked if I had any advice for someone trying to break into infrastructure architecture. I stared at that email for a long time, remembering the smug confidence, the dismissiveness, the way he had treated decades of experience like it was an obstacle to his vision. I wrote back, take the time to learn from people who have actually done the work. Real expertise isn't something you can shortcut, and confidence without competence is just arrogance. Good luck. I haven't heard back. Sometimes late at night, when I'm working on something complex, I think about those 72 hours when the company was burning and they finally understood what I had been protecting them from all those years. Part of me is still angry that it took a $4. $2 million disaster for them to respect what I did. Part of me wishes I had just walked away and let them collapse. But there's another part, a part I'm not entirely proud of, that's deeply satisfied. They learned, in the most expensive way possible, exactly what happens when you replace experience with nepotism. They learned what all those years of late nights and emergency calls were actually worth. They learned the difference between someone who talks about systems and someone who actually builds them. I gave them 23 years of loyalty. They gave me Trevor. And in the end, I gave them one final lesson. Competence isn't replaceable, experience isn't outdated, and the person you treat as disposable might be the only one who can save you. They won't forget it again.